Slide 13 begins the discussion of the organizational moderators. In the original model, this box was referred to as situational moderators, but I felt that it just didn't convey the full meaning of the source of these influences, hence the change to organizational moderators. In some respects, I look upon an organization as being like a person, with a personality, a history of trying to project a certain image. Consequently, some of the concepts that apply to the individual also applies to the organization. So you will find that I will speak of organizations as if they're people that are acting and reacting to its environment. For instance, sense of coherence and Johari window are overarching concepts in this part of the model as well. Just as with individuals, organizations have a sense of whether the world makes sense or not, whether it holds together or not. The same is true with the organization at all levels, and probably in every department. The sense of coherence, I think, comes largely from the concept of primacy. First, the founder of an organization displays a given attitude, a view of the world, for good or for ill, infusing the organization with that attitude and view, which can cast a shadow over the organization years after the founder is long since dead and gone. Second, some dramatic or traumatic event can occur in the organization's history and development that either reinforces or invalidates the organization's view of the world in which it is doing business. It can also impact how much or in what way it tries to hide failures or display its successes. And it can really come up with some goofy things. An organization can come out of such a situation either straightened or shaken as it moves forward into the future, and it can then impact everything else that follows. And as with the individual, in reference to the Johari window, as I suggested earlier, an organization may have things of how it does business, of a past failure or a past success, that it may either want hidden or may want to display for all to see. And sometimes an organization, they don't really see themselves the way others see them. It takes someone from the outside, a consultant or a new employee, to be able to point to the organization and say, this is the way things really are working in this organization, and it isn't very well. Okay. Immediate job context involves two items. First, reinforcement. Simply put, what is reinforced, what is rewarded, and what is punished in the organization. If, for instance, delivering bad news is punished, those in charge will likely not be warned by their underlings of problems for fear of paying the consequences. Second, the other pressures that can come into play, such as work schedules, quality of material used in production, the quality of equipment, and many other factors inside the organization which influence the overall production of the product or the provision of the service. How these factors are dealt with conveys a message to the employees about how serious the employer is about providing the product or service. An employee who recognizes shoddy materials going into a product will make assumptions about management and their attitude toward what they are doing, their customers, and its employees. Characteristics of the work includes three broad categories. First, how well is an employee oriented to the organization, and how well are they oriented toward what they do in the job. We have all worked in organizations where orientation was a joke, where the new employee is expected to pick things up, to figure out things as they go along. Other organizations pay very close attention to orientation, consciously conveying the business philosophy, history, founding, and attitudes toward its new employees, while consciously reinforcing the same to its veteran employees. This conveys to the employee the value the organization places on the work being done and the job the employee is expected to perform, and the high hopes that the organization perhaps has for that employee. Second is the resolution of moral conflict. That is to say, how does the organization deal with the hard choices of quality, honesty, integrity, and just conflicts of personality in the workplace? Some organizations face the conflicts head-on, others don't. Some organizations side with favored employees over others, while others are honest brokers in conflict no matter who's involved. Finally, in this section is the Code of Ethics and Ethical Principles. How does the employer view ethics, honesty, integrity? Does the organization have a code of ethics or a code of conduct? And do they take it seriously? Or is it just window dressing? Does management openly discuss the influence that the code has played in its decision-making process? Organizational culture is frequently conveyed by co-workers who have been around for a while, who know the lay of the land, and who help new employees figure out how to get along. But that's not the entire picture. Sometimes attitudes, points of view, perspectives are there and seem to have always been part of the organization, and there is no apparent awareness of how it started, how it is affecting the business, of how it is done, whether it is a benefit or whether it is causing problems or whether there's alternatives. First is primacy, which we've already discussed in some detail. Events that have occurred early or dramatic events in the organization tend to impact everything that happens afterward, for good or for ill. Normative structure is the means by which normal or abnormal behaviors is measured and maintained in an organization. This structure is not necessarily written, it's not on paper anywhere, but rather it is unspoken understandings that get reinforced or punished, usually through nonverbals, sometimes through direct messages, smiles, frowns, shrugging the shoulder, all this sort of stuff will convey the message to employees whether they're doing well or whether they're not doing well. The extent to which the normative structure is clear and understood versus muddled and made up as you go along will determine how consistent employees are in their behavior. Referring to others essentially involves those around you in the workplace who you look to, respect, and who act as a model for others to follow. They are the person others refer to when things seem to be unclear. The extent to which you have or do not have someone like this influences how much you'll likely take a particular path, or if you're just simply out there on your own. All organizations have a tolerance for risk. This can primarily be influenced by the other cultural aspects in the organization as well as its past, its primacy. Some organizations may come off as swashbuckling, daredevil, devil may care, until suddenly it hits a brick wall. If it hits hard, it may impact its tolerance for taking chances in the future to the point where decision-making is largely defensive rather than creative and expansive. Another organization may be adverse to risk-taking from its very beginning, and that may have come from the personality and the subsequent groundwork laid by the founder. Obedience to authority essentially involves the question of how obedient do you have to be to those in charge. Can you get away with things? If you get caught, what happens? Is obedience to mid-management authority just as important as obedience to top management authority? Or does top management undermine middle management, or vice versa? Next, who pays the price when things go wrong? In other words, who is responsible for the consequences when bad things happen? And how is that blame assigned? Who assigns it? The individual who feels they could be held responsible for the consequences of any given action or outcome will behave very differently as compared to the person who believes there is no accountability for bad behavior or outcomes. Finally, in this section is moral development. Like with the individual, an organization projects a certain sense of how and why it behaves toward its employees, its vendors, and its customers. Does the organization do just enough so it won't be punished by some authority? Stage one. In other words, if there is not a fear of punishment, how would the organization behave? Does it strictly follow regulations and the rules, no matter how it might affect real people? Stage 4. Does management assert a higher purpose and responsibility when it comes to providing its services or manufacturing its products? And does it hold to that standard even if it is not to their benefit? Stage 5. As with most all other concepts, organizations fall along a continuum. Depending on where they fall largely determines how consistent they behave from one time to the next. Finally, the factors outside the organization, such as government tax policies, the regulatory environment, competition, availability of materials and financial resources, labor market, etc., etc. The ease or the difficulty each of these challenges represent has its influence in how an organization deals with its ethical dilemmas. Okay, this is the first session. I know we have covered a lot of material, and you can certainly listen to this again if you wish and go through the book as you listen to it. I will discuss and describe the assumptions, which is the next chapter in the book. And these assumptions are what are the basis or the foundation of the entire model. Now examine the course outline and see what needs to be read and what needs to be written before the next session, and try to email or fax me any responses or any comments that you might have. Thank you very much for listening, and again, contact me, TSCHEAR @CCMSINC, if you have any questions or comments. Goodbye.